Tim's book really elucidates that. And Mr. Rogers' ability was to be creative with you. He was, as Tim puts it, he was ever present. It was almost like he shined. And it was sort of incredible. But it showed me, there are so many ways to express your creative self, and his creative self was just to be there, to truly be there. And it's really amazing. So I'm not going to steal too much of Tim's thunder, but that, when I read his book, it all came back to me. And I thought, here's a man who managed to sort of put that on paper, which was not easy. And it's just an incredible story. And just to give you a little bit of Tim's background, he's a columnist at the Star-Telegram. I'm sure I should know his bio by heart, but I don't. But I do read his column from time to time. He's excellent. He's award-winning. You can read his bio. But I'm very, very pleased that he agreed to come tonight. And I think that all of you will be pleased as well. There you go.
I have a big problem. I don't use notes. And my practice is to get up and do these things from the heart. The problem is, and my problem is that my heart is so full right now, I don't know where to start. The way this all started was I was working on a story for the Star-Telegram about violence on television and its effect on children, and one of my colleagues said, you should interview Captain Kangaroo and Mr. Rogers for that story. And I thought, what a great idea. So I put out the necessary calls, and both of them called me back on the same day, almost the same time. A remarkable feat of journalism, if I must say so myself. And I was much more excited to talk to Captain Kangaroo that day than I was Fred Rogers. So he called first. We talked for a while. Hang up, he's a great guy too. And then the phone rings again, and there's this voice at the other end of the line. Well, hello, Tim Madigan. This is Fred Rogers calling from Pittsburgh. As if I wouldn't have known otherwise. So we talked for an hour, which is a long time for a quote-unquote celebrity to give a podunk journalist from Fort Worth, Texas. And then he says to me, he says, Tim, do you know what the most important thing in my life is right now? And I said, I have no idea, Mr. Rogers. He says, talking to Mr. Tim Madigan on the telephone. And I'm sure I rolled my eyes and I went, oh, give me a break. I'm a journalist. I've been played by the best of them. I know when I'm being manipulated, but I'm sure I said, oh, isn't that nice, Mr. Rogers? But then I went to Pittsburgh. That conversation went well enough that I went to Pittsburgh. I don't know where I lost my thought out there somewhere in the ether, and if it's important, you guys ask me about it later. I went to Pittsburgh to do a profile on him, and I spent 4 days with him, several long interviews, watched him film a program, and watched him interact with people. And it's like he said, when he was with you, he was with you, and it didn't matter who you were. Whether you were Katie Couric, who's a good friend, or the guy handing out towels at his health club, or podunk journalist from Fort Worth, Texas, whether it was 5 hours, 5 minutes, 5 days, when he was with you, he was with you. And I watched this over and over and over again, and I realized that when he said that to me on the telephone, he was being absolutely genuine. That the most important thing in his life at that moment was talking to me. Not that there was anything so special about me, but because I was living and breathing and at the other end of the line. And stories are legion of lives being transformed by the briefest encounter with that kind of historic goodness. You'd think there would be a lesson there. If we could just be more present to one another, what a different world this would be. There is a great risk in being a friend with Fred Rogers. And that is, at some point, you're going to have to come clean. On the wall of his office was a quote from The Little Prince. We talked about it over at our table. Anything essential is invisible to the eye. And what he did was go through life trying to find out about what he called essential invisibles. And he would have this very gentle but very persistent way of coaxing things out. Anything mentionable is manageable, he would say. Or he would say, that which is most personal is most universal. I.e., the things that we most try to conceal from one another are invariably the things we most have in common with one another. So he would do this, and I'd write to him. Finally, in late June of 1996, this all began in November of 1995, I wrote him a letter. I said, Dear Fred, I'm really glad to be your friend. But if we're going to be friends, I think you'd be the first to agree that you need to know the truth of my life. And it's not very pretty. I told him about what I recognize in retrospect as life-threatening depression. And to say that I had low self-esteem would have been to say that I had any self-esteem. And my marriage is crumbling, and I tell you, I cannot underestimate the misery of that moment in my life. And at the heart of it all, I said to Fred in this letter, is all my life I've been trying to get my father to be proud of me. Good athlete, good student, win journalism awards, but whatever I've done, it just seems like I've never been able to succeed. And so I said, Fred, I have a question to ask you. Would you be proud of me? Folded it up, put an envelope, licked a stamp, and mailed it away. A supreme act of desperation, inspiration, who knows? And this is what I got back. Dear Tim, the answer to your question, July 1st, 1996. Tim, the answer to your question is yes, in capital letters. A resounding yes. I will be proud of you. I am proud of you. I have been proud of you since first we met. He said, I'm deeply touched that you would offer so much of yourself to me, and he was, I guarantee you. And look forward to knowing all that you would care to share in the future. He said, nothing you could tell me could change my yes for you. Please remember that. He said, your place in this life is unique, absolutely unique. Do you know how special you really are? I feel blessed to be one of your friends. Only God can arrange such mutually trusting relationships. For sure, yes, Tim, yes. Love, Fred. And he said, I wonder if you realize how unique you really are. And since this book has been published, I've gotten letters from all over the world, emails, letters, from people who were depressed, from people who were suffering. And they said, you know, Tim, I know those letters are written to you, but it felt like they were written to me too. And there's lots of others like them in the book. And I have no doubt that quite literally that is true. He says, you know how unique you are? Well, yes and no. I may be unique only in the sense that I'm a human being, but that's all that mattered to him. You know how special you really are? He would say the same thing to you. He said, nothing you could tell me could change my yes for you. Please remember that. And part of the deal when you're a friend with a guy like this, subconsciously you're thinking, I got to be able to say or do something that would say, that would render him incapable of that unconditional regard. And by a year and a half later, I thought I'd found it. Because the book begins with me putting up Christmas lights in our home in Arlington, Texas, thinking it was going to be the last year that I would do this with this family at this house. Because a few days before, I told my wife I wanted a separation. And so I'm thinking as I'm putting up the lights, how am I going to find an apartment? How are we going to tell the kids? How are we going to tell our family? And then how in the world am I going to tell Fred Rogers I'm getting ready to leave my wife? This man who had spent his life fighting for children and families, and I'm getting ready to blow up my own. So after the Christmas lights are finished, I go into the den, sit down at the computer, tears are streaming down my face, start typing, "Dear Fred, I really hate to have to tell you this, but this is what's going on in my house right now. You know, could you love a man like this? Could you be proud of a man who's about ready to leave his wife?" 3 days later, for a very short time, "Dear Tim, please know that I would never forsake you. That I would never stop loving you. That I would never be disappointed in you. Those who love you are privileged to share your pain." He said, "The kingdom of God is for the brokenhearted." He said, "I'm more and more convinced of that fewer and fewer people can escape major suffering in this life." He signed off by saying, "If you ever need me, I'll do my best to get to you or you to me." And then he said, "You are my beloved brother, Tim." He said, "You are God's beloved son." This, at the moment of my greatest shame. Fred used to say, he said, "Tim, the older I get, the more I believe that there's a loving mystery at the heart of the universe that just yearns to be expressed." And poetry, grace, and today. But you know, what you have done is you have expressed that loving mystery at the heart of the universe. And thank you for making me a part of it this year. God bless.
Now I think I'm supposed to react to that, which, as you can see, is a tall order. But I think I'll react to it by telling Tim a story that I haven't told him, although he knows a bit of it. My dad died last year, and it's going to be a little hard to get through. And we had been estranged for a long time. Nothing, not so estranged, not that we couldn't talk, but we just never talked about anything important. And he had lung cancer, very, very bad lung cancer, so it was pretty obvious that the end was near. And strangely, about, 6 months before it happened, I read Tim's book, and it was just sort of a lark. I bought it in an airport bookstore, and I read it, and it was exactly what I was feeling. And I have to say, Tim, it was more important to me than any other book I've ever read. And it helped me be present totally at the time of my father's death, the moment it happened.